firstly, about the report into aged care. What do you make of it?
Well, I think it says it all. The title says it all. Neglect. And now you were talking before about people serving their country. I don't think you'll find a better example of public service than the Commissioner, Richard Tracy, who served in the Army his entire life, and then he took on the role as Commissioner in this Aged Care Royal Commission. Sadly, he died just before this report was published, but this interim findings that he put down here is one of the strongest we've ever seen, and clearly he wanted to send the message to government, and that message was neglect. And if you think about it, neglect is actually part of the phrase we use now for elder abuse, abuse and neglect. Some of the things he highlighted were particularly the cruel and unkind system that has been built there. So in other words, we've got institutionalised elder abuse being sanctioned by government. And I'll give you some of the things he talked about. He said there were 4,013 cases of physical or sexual assault. Now that's extraordinary. There are 120,000 people waiting for a home care package, 16,000 of whom died last year. Now if we compared that to the road toll or any other figure in Australia, we'd say do something about it immediately. And this government was caught short. They didn't have anything to go on the day. The minister came out and started talking about things like, oh, this is to do with ageism and we're still developing our response. They knew right back in January, when National Seniors was there on day one, when Professor John McCallum, who was our expert witness, he said that the home care wait list was a running sore and an abject failure. And then we had individual stories, one of whom came from my brother, whose wife died waiting for a home care package and got the package 1 year later. And the very forensic Dr. Timothy McAvoy said, I would like to know how many people have died waiting for a home care package. And we were given the answer, 16,000 people died. And we also found another 14,000 went into aged care when they wanted to stay in their own homes. Now think about that, 30,000 Australians who either died or went into aged care because of a cruel, unkind, unresponsive system.
Ian, look, I know Graham has very strong views about this, but I'll just make one point before we throw it over to Graham. Last time I spoke to the Prime Minister about this in relation to home care packages and allowing people to live in their own home and funding them and providing carers, he argued that there was a very, very significant shortage of appropriate carers, that in fact these people are not taking the courses at TAFE and so on. So as in relation to other skills, the kind of specialised skill needed for this home care is not available. How do you address that?
Well, I can address that quite simply. I know a home care provider here in South Australia who has gone to the state government. He's been asking the federal government to provide him with a pilot program. He wants to train people well. I met someone on Sunday who used to work for Holden's, who lost their job, who's just done a 20-week course, who's about to start work. Look, Graham, we can gear up for things in no time at all. You have to have the political will, and you don't use a pathetic excuse like, oh, we've got some workforce issues if you've got 120,000 people waiting for a home care package. I think that is a complete and utter cop-out, and that is why I believe that Richard Tracy entitled his interim report, he called it neglect, neglect of training. Now the training, by the way, too, is done at a state government level, and the Victorian government has come out last week and it has legislated minimum staffing requirements. The Victorian government's come out with a plan. I call on each state government in Australia to train people for this and do something about it. Now, they could be doing it in South Australia, Western Australia, Tasmania. All those state governments could be doing it. And some of the people they could be training are some of the people that are on Newstart at the moment, like the gentleman I met the other day who'd been working for Holden's, lost his job. I've met people in that situation here in South Australia. There are plenty of people who would like to work in that area and they would like to be trained properly. And the good thing about this gentleman is he told me he was doing a 20-week course of both practical and academic classroom work, and not one of these pathetic courses being run by these training providers where they do 7 weeks online or whatever.
And the important thing, if I just interrupt, the important thing about that is that what you're doing is giving the over 50s a real chance. You're not excluding them. Now, as you know better than I, they're excluded from so many things when it comes to trying to get a job. And that's why the unemployment rate of 54 and above has been so high. And this is the perfect opportunity for people like
Exactly, Graham. Gosh, Graham, I wish you were still back in government, because we need that sort of thinking. And if you still know some people in government, which I know you do, that is the sort of thinking we've got to have. Massive training program for those people so that they can work there. And they should also realise that home care is not all about hygiene and those sort of things. A lot of the home care is about taking people from their home to somewhere else. They might be taking them to the doctor, they might be helping them with their shopping, those sorts of things. There's a lot involved in it. And I mean, I was speaking to someone the other day and they told me that in Cuba, for example, where they have a life expectancy which is now higher than the United States, they told me that home care over there is the way that they go, and they pick people up in the morning, they take them to a place where they might have breakfast and their meals for the day, and they bring them home at the end of the day. I mean, there's innovative ways that we could be doing aged care. We don't have to do it in this institutionalised, where we have these hideous words like consumer. You know, would you like to be a consumer in an aged care facility? It sounds just disgraceful. And I went to a conference only the other week, and they were talking about consumers and aged care facilities and the industry.
Dreadful. So just to take you another point, you've talked in the past too about, I think your words, pension poverty. Can you just elaborate on that?
Well, this is another issue that we've got in Australia at the moment that needs to be addressed very rapidly, because the rate of home ownership is falling, and the people that are slipping through the system and that are really struggling are those that don't own their own homes. And home ownership is now spiralling downwards, and it's expected to be only 57% of Australians will own their own home by 2050. Now, that's coming down from what used to be around 80 to 90% of people when they retired owned their own home or were paying it off. So we've got some big problems there. Pension poverty is a big one, and that's why we're calling for an independent tribunal to set the rate of the pension, set the deeming rates, and also deal with these issues like Newstart, where it appears that once again we are seeing the balance of the budget being done at the expense of people. The deeming rates is a classic example, Graham. You were talking about that before. I mean, I met a woman the other day. She told me that she only wants to keep her money. I mean, if you're in your 80s, you want to keep your money in the bank where it's safe. What National Seniors has just been to Canberra to suggest to the government, I'd love both of your thoughts on this, is why, if the government says you have to be deemed to be earning 3%, why does not the government offer a seniors bond? In other words, a bond backed by the government that seniors can put their money in that will give them that 3%. And that way the government could use it for things like you're talking about, infrastructure building. It could be that project you were talking about before, Alan. It could be about improving the conditions of Australians in the outback or whatever. You can build an infrastructure bond that is there. I don't know, and you make that available to the seniors so that the big investment banks can't go in and get that 3%. It's there for the seniors. That way you're helping them. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I think the idea is excellent. I mean, we're canvassing a lot of things here tonight, and you're obviously full bottle on this, so I just want to ask you a couple of phrases in a sense. You've also said that the government is balancing the budget on the back of pensioners.
Yes. Well, this is because if you look at that deeming rate issue, for example, I'll tell you what happens. If you've got $200,000 in the bank, which is where a pensioner might have it, and that's sort of, you know, let's just say it's an amount that they've got in the bank, they're deemed to be earning, say, 3%, which is what the government deeming rate is. So they're saying they're getting $6,000. We know that the bank might be paying them 1.5, so they're not getting that. They're getting $3,000. Then they get taxed 50 cents in the dollar on that, and they lose that money off their pension. $1,500 disappears from their pension. So for every million Australians that happens to, the government makes $1.5 billion. That's how they balance it. It's like one of those tricks where you move the money around and they go, right, we'll leave the deeming rate there, then we'll take the money off the pension there, the pension doesn't get the interest, and of course, government wins, pensioner loses. That's why I'm saying
should the deeming rate should the deeming rate be set by an independent body, independent of the government?
Exactly. It should be. And if they won't come at that, if they will not come at that, then provide an investment product for seniors to get the so-called deeming rate that they say you can get. Give them that government-backed security, because if you talk to these people, if you're 85 years of age, you're not going to go and play the stock market. Don't be stupid.
No,
I mean,
quite.
Understand the minds of seniors. There are and the other thing, Graham and Alan, I want to tell you this. 40% of people over 65 do not have superannuation. This is why I say the government does not understand the minds of seniors. And they lost the last election, the Labor Party, because they didn't understand the minds of seniors. And this government will lose the next election if they don't understand the minds of seniors, because 1 in 3 voters is now over 65, and they are worrying about these things. They're worrying about aged care. They're worrying about their retirement income. So if you hold a Royal Commission, then you've got to fix the problem. If you hold a retirement income review, you have to look at those problems and say, how can we fix them? We're not going to be conned by, having an inquiry, then parking the report in the corner, having a fact-finding mission on the retirement income review, and then saying we now know the facts, and then just carrying on business as usual. I tell you what, you go out and talk to people out there at the moment, and they are wanting leadership from government. They don't want commissioned inquiries. They want some leadership. And this is why 100%. I'm saying if the government stepped forward and said, we'll give you an investment bond, that would solve the deeming problem.
100%.
But they won't do these things because they're too scared to make a decision.